Thank you. Hello everyone, welcome to tonight's meeting. I'm Councillor Neil Lawrenson. I'm going to chair tonight's committee meeting. I've got the standard introductory notes and then we'll dive into the agenda. So yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome to everyone who's watching eagerly at home instead of the World Cup. So, as I've already said, welcome. This is a public meeting. Members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live, as I've just alluded to. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you're deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds in the Guildhall, we must leave immediately. Please don't spend time gathering personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed in the building. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking, and that is a reminder for me as well. Hopefully you can all hear me fairly clearly. I feel my throat going hoarse already. Wonder whether that's due to how muggy it is. Another sip of water will do just fine. Okay, so yeah, we're going to, well, before we do go into the agenda, I should say I've had a chat with officers about slightly rejigging the order so that officers aren't obliged to stay for the duration of the whole evening, not least because of how muggy it is. But we suggested that we move the exempt item, which is a presentation, to agenda item 6 instead of right at the end. So we'll do that with your agreement. So what we're suggesting is that we move the presentation to come after agenda item 5, which is the external audit plan. So we'll hear from assets, and then we suggest that we go into that presentation, which would then mean the public side of the meeting is stopped for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll resume the public meeting and resume the agenda as written. So can I just get sort of nods of agreement that that's okay with everyone? Fantastic, thank you very much. So yeah, appointment of substitutes. No substitutes tonight. Thank you, Julian. Any declarations of interest that we ought to be aware of? Nope. And I've not been notified of any public participation requests? No. Okay, so straight on to agenda item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting on the 17th of March. I'm just going to find them myself. Bear with. Here they are. So we'll take it page by page in terms of accuracy and or matters arising. So page 1 of the minutes, Councillor Teixeira.
Thank you, Chair. I want to raise a point that I want to go into more detail later. I had enjoyed some training on audit and governance from the LGA last week. And one of the items that the presenter was very keen on, and I think has some legs, is that this committee shouldn't have anything to note. We should, in fact, have proactive actions or a recommendation or something that is not just a passive note. Now, we've done it already with the risk management, as in we're selectively deep diving into areas to make it more meaningful. So when it comes later on into the agenda, I'd like to just explore that a bit more with the committee's agreement, or at least to get some ideas about that. Thank you.
Actually, I didn't make that notification now just when I put my hand up. It was on page 2, paragraph 85. It mentions that there was one overdue action from the internal audit progress report related to staff training in fraud, bribery and corruption. I was just wondering if that had been completed, please.
Thank you, Councillor Mace. I believe you've had a written response to that question prior to the meeting from Cathy. So, Cathy, would you mind verbally sharing that?
Yes, we identified some fraud awareness training and bribery and corruption training, made those available on our internal learning lounge to the wider management team initially as mandatory. They had to complete it by the end of this month. And on the 1st of June, we opened that up wider to all office-based staff. And I think it's also available for members if they wish to do it.
Thank you both. Any other questions, comments about page 2 of the minutes? No. And page 3? No. And those are the minutes. So I'll sign those off. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, we're going to move on to agenda item 5, which is the external audit plan for 25-26. Going to hand over to Karen from Assets. Thank you. You've come a long way yet again, just to come to Worcester. Fantastic. So yeah, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. In front of you today, we have our external audit plan for the 25-26 audit of the annual accounts. There are 3 areas which you could say are distinct, but they do equally overlap in the plan that I want to highlight to members of this committee. The first one is the audit of the financial statements, the annual accounts. We set out our plan, our approach to the audit of the financial statements for 25-26, and the areas that I would like to highlight are the significant risk areas which we've identified within our plan, and draw your attention to the materiality levels that we've set. In terms of the significant risk areas, there are 3 areas which are presumed risks that you would typically find in any, I'm going to say, public sector audit. These are management override of controls, and the other 2 are revenue recognition and expenditure recognition. Expenditure recognition is in the context of a public sector audit, and you wouldn't typically find it in a commercial audit. Their focus is on revenue recognition. We have considered both revenue recognition and expenditure recognition in the context of the Council's income and expenditure, and we have actually rebutted those presumed risks. So this will mean that actually the work that we do, we still do work over these areas, but we've assessed it as a low risk rather than a high risk. The other 2 areas are over property, plant and equipment valuations and investment property valuations and pension valuations. And these 2 areas are in particular significant in 25-26 because the Council, in relation to PPE, property, plant and equipment, have undertaken a full revaluation exercise on its entire property portfolio to support the build back work. And on the pensions, the 25-26 will see the inclusion or impact of the triennial valuation that took place on the pension fund that Worcester participate in. And again, that links into our build back work because we were waiting for the outcome of the triennial valuation and the incorporation of that to allow us to almost reset the position for Worcester City Council in terms of that build back work. So in tying into the build back work, 25-26 is actually a key year for us in terms of that plan that we have for building back assurance and hopefully achieving that lifting of the disclaimed opinion by 27-28. If you remember, we have to have 3 balance sheets to enable us to do that, and therefore 25-26 is the key year, and PPE and pensions are pivotal to us building back that assurance for 25-26. The other area included within our plan is value for money. At the planning stages, we haven't identified any significant risks. This is consistent with what we reported in the previous 2 years as well. Local government reorganisation will feature within our value for money reporting, and we will report back by November in our Auditor's annual report our findings and conclusions as they are at that point in time in our Auditor's annual report. Our plan also includes our approach or our plan for build back, and we are continuing to refine and develop our plan with a view of hopefully being in that position in 27-28 for lifting the disclaimed opinion. As part of the build back work, we have commenced an initial risk assessment into the council's areas where we think we need to gain that assurance to build back the work. And that includes consideration of looking back over the disclaimed periods in terms of what processes and controls and arrangements were in place. For example, looking at whether or not the financial statements were prepared on time, whether or not what opinion internal audit was providing, what your annual governance statements were concluding on. And our initial assessment is that Worcester City Council are at the lower end of that risk spectrum. And what that means in terms of our build back work is that our focus will be on the balance sheet rather than the income and expenditure transactions over the disclaimed periods, which means that there's less work for us to do in terms of that approach and building back assurance. The other two areas that I just want to draw attention to in the audit plan are our independence. We are independent of the council. We do provide what we classify as non-audit services in respect of the delivery and certification of the housing benefit subsidy claim. However, we have got appropriate safeguards in place to maintain our independence. And the other area included within our plan are the proposed or indicative audit fees, which are largely based on PSA's scale. However, additional fees will be incurred to do the build back work, and if we identify anything throughout the audit process that merits a fee variation, we would be having that discussion with the finance team in advance of carrying out the work. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Karen. Just before we take questions, just want to bear in mind Councillor Teixeira's comment about noting. This item is for noting, but you're going to come back later on that point, yeah?
Well, I could perhaps just say, since you asked me, I think there will be occasions where we can't necessarily contribute much, but I still think there should be perhaps an element of approve rather than note, or something a bit more proactive in terms of the language.
Okay. I'm minded to agree, but I'm just before coming, Christy, I'm minded to agree with that, but is this quite a fundamental alteration because noting comes up quite a lot? But
I don't think it can be applied to this committee.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I just want to highlight that this item in particular, before we do, if we make changes, this is for noting. But I'm going to invite questions. But Chris, you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Just to mention that one of the other Worcestershire Council's audit committees has actually raised a similar point very recently, having gone on training. So there is as an example I can give of a form of words, you might be able to enhance it, but I'll just read that out. Members are asked to resolve to confirm, but they are assured, having considered the report. That's in use at one of the other authorities. That's an example that you could use or you could improve.
I'm struggling to choose my own words at this point because I don't understand what you just said. And I've got a Cambridge English degree. I prefer noted to that, but I think that is that's stronger than noted.
I think it's for
We'll
the
come
later
back.
discussion. I don't
Yeah.
think we can reverse engineer.
This might be another constitutional amendment. But anyway, we'll take questions, but it's leading towards a noting. That's what I was trying to get across. But I did want to acknowledge your point. Councillor Mace has got his hand in the air. Anyone else want to? Councillor Barnes? Yeah. Councillor Mace, carry on.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the audit plan, and also I know you've already answered these questions via email, but I'm going to ask them so they're on the record for the public meeting. On page 23, the risk around valuation of the defined benefit pension net liability assets. So my understanding is that the pension scheme is managed on our behalf by Worcestershire County Council, and their audits are up to date rather than disclaimed in a rare instance of the County Council being ahead of us on something, which presumably means that they have reasonable assurance over some of this area. Does that mitigate any of the risk for us? As I understand, this is a particular challenge to assess. And I have another question, but I'll come back to that one.
We seek assurances from the administering authority, or actually it's the external auditors to the pension fund that we seek assurances from to inform our audit of Worcester's accounts. And those assurances are in relation to the pension fund providing the actuary with information to support the valuations that then feature in the council's accounts. So it is good that they are not in a disclaimed opinion. They are slightly delayed. They are not on the same timetable as historic has been. However, they are providing an opinion in advance of the backstop date. So the risk for us will be, as those backstop dates become more aligned, that if for any reason the pension fund auditor is not in a position to sign off before we're looking to sign off, then we might have a risk there or a challenge there. In terms of the assurances, I don't see any risk in that. It is in line with normal audit practices or expectation that we would receive those assurances. The assurances this year will be around about the triennial valuation information alongside the information that is passed to the actuary for the figure that features in your balance sheet as well.
And then the second question was just on page 28 around the risk factors laid out by LARIG 06. So there's several different criteria there. I was wondering if you could comment on whether the relative importance of different criteria, because I know on some of these, like number of years of disclaimed opinions, complexity and volume of movement in reserves over the disclaimed period, because we've had quite a lot, and changes in key personnel, because we've changed our section 1.1 officer, our head of finance. Do those materially change our risk? Thank you.
So you're right. When we've carried out our risk assessment, we have taken into account those areas that are identified in the guidance that's been issued to us, and we consider them, but we also consider what factors or what controls and processes the council has in place to mitigate if that risk has been identified. So, for example, the fact that actually you have had a number of years disclaimed opinions is a risk. However, we have then stepped back and looked at, well, what controls and processes did the council have in place? Did they produce their accounts on a timely basis? Was there any objections or anything like that received? And based on the overall view, we're still coming out that actually we're assessing Worcester to be at the lower end of that risk spectrum.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. Again, about the pension. Local government pension scheme, as I understand it, I better declare an interest first. I work for Unison and I've attended their local government conference this weekend. Local government pension scheme is now going to have less local scrutiny in Worcestershire because it's being amalgamated in some way, so it's only part of the picture rather than being the whole picture for Worcestershire. That local scrutiny falling, is that going to have an impact on how we can control what's going on as a council and as maybe individual members and people who are actually in the pension scheme? Civil service pension is now a basket case. I have concerns that the way that the local government pension scheme is now likely to be amalgamated at a much higher level means that there'll be less oversight for us on it. And could you comment on the risks on that?
I probably would need to default to the council in terms of the overall structure and governance arrangements, and so our focus is currently on the in-year 25-26, where those arrangements haven't changed. So the council participate in the Worcestershire Pension Fund, which is administered by the County Council, and the governance arrangements are set out and clearly set out. They have a pension board and they have a pensions committee, and there's representation, as I understand, from councils that are involved in or participate in that pension fund. How that changes over the future years, to be honest, I don't know, and I don't know what the impact would be on our audit as it stands at the moment.
Okay, any further questions, comments? Yep, Councillor Jagger.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question, and I recognise I've probably asked a very similar question before, so please just humour me. On page 16 of your report, there is a table that talks about the significant risk of material misstatement. And I know from a question I asked previously, I think I understand that this is not evidence. There's no evidence of fraud in the council, but there's a lot of jargon on that table. So I just wondered if you could just try to explain it as simply as you can. You know, there are words here like assertion, rebutted. What does that actually mean? Particularly the first line that says management override controls, and then it says inherent risk of mismanaging very high. If you could just give a bit of context to anybody just looking at that table out of just at that table. Thank you.
Of course. So there are presumed risks in any audit around about fraud, and the one that any audit, commercial, public sector, has to consider is what they call management override of controls. And what we are talking about here is, in effect, the council will have processes, procedures in place around about predominantly journals, so inputting things into the system that informs the financial statements. And there is a what we perceive to be a risk in the audit world, that management can override those. So they could, for example, say to an individual, can you put this through? So the controls in place will be that management can't do that themselves. They are then having to fraudulently ask someone else to do that. So we consider that to be a risk across the entire financial statements. And we are unable to not do any work on that, and we assess that as a high risk on any audit that we do. The other two areas that are presumed risks are around about fraud in revenue recognition and fraud in expenditure recognition. And this is the manipulation of, we'll start with income, revenue recognition, the manipulation of your income that you present in your financial statements to achieve a more favourable position. And when we consider this, we aren't considering it at an overall financial statement level. We are considering it at a focused level around about income. And in audit world, we have what we call assertions. And what we are considering, for example, at an assertion level is there a risk that the council is understating its income? So that would be, we would be looking at the completeness side. Or are they overstating their income, which we call occurrence? So we consider it at a lower level and where the risk could lie. And for this council, we've considered the main income streams, and predominantly they are grant funding or revenue grant funding that could not be subject to that manipulation. So we rebut that risk that is a presumed risk and therefore assess it as low. We still do work on that income recognition, but we don't do it to the extent that we would have done if we had still assessed it as a high risk area. On the flip side, for public sector bodies, the guidance that we receive is that because predominantly public sector bodies are largely driven by expenditure rather than income, we flip that risk on its head and think about it in the context of expenditure. And again, we think about it on whether or not actually councils and public sector bodies are potentially overstating expenditure or understating expenditure to achieve that favourable financial position. Typically on the expenditure side, we think the risk is more around about that completeness. Councils are potentially not shown all the expenditure so that they achieve a higher surplus, which contributes to your general fund balances. But again, looking at this council's expenditure transactions, a large proportion of the council's expenditure is on payroll, and that is a heavily controlled process where we believe there is less likely subject to manipulation, and therefore we rebut again and we assess that as low. And that again doesn't mean that we aren't doing any work on payroll, it's just that we're not doing it as a high risk area. Does that help?
Yeah, what about the management overrides? Can you just explain what the actual work you will be doing in order to assess that?
Yeah, so predominantly this is looking at the ledger system. So the ledger system is ultimately what is used to prepare the financial statements, and we basically get a download of all the transactions that that go through the ledger that inform the financial statements, and we analyse on a risk basis those transactions and select samples that are geared towards identifying potential management override of controls and test those to allow us to conclude whether or not there has been any.
Thank you both. Any other questions or comments about the external audit plan 25-26? No, that's from me. So thanks again, Karen, for the overview and indeed the report, and to your colleagues as well, and for coming all this way. So as I said at the beginning of this item, we're here to note the audit plan for 25-26, external audit plan, I should say. So all those in favour of noting, or whatever Chris's alternative was. You're assured, that was the word, assured. We're all assured, certain, yep, perfect. That's carried. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Karen, again. I'm going to read from the City Council website the agenda because I feel I should, because the public might be watching this meeting and they might be wondering why we're about to do what we're about to do. So we did agree that we'd rejig the order so that we'd take an exempt item, risk management deep dive, equality in public sector, equality duty presentation. In order to do that, we need to pass a resolution, which is on the website, and I'm going to be really pedantic and read that resolution, and hopefully you're all going to just nod and say, yes, let's do it. So this committee, in order to take this item, is invited to pass the following resolution. Under section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of information as defined in Schedule 12A of that Act. So in case you're wondering why we're about to close the Zoom and do this privately, that's why, because we're, it's in line with that legislation. I think in total, I'm saying this to members of the public, we're going to be about half an hour, and then we'll switch the Zoom back on and we'll return to agenda item 6. So sorry if you're watching this meeting from outside. We're going to go into the presentation, and I'm going to hand over to David and Richard. Me? I just took it as read. Yes, sorry. Everyone okay with that? Sorry, I missed a very important part. Yeah, voting, democracy, yeah. Thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you, Councillor Tsay. Okay, everyone, I think we'll resume. So, yes, I'm trying to get back to the original agenda. I believe it's Corporate Risk Management Report, Q4, 25-26. And I believe it's Sean going to take a lead on this one. Excuse me, that's what I was looking for. I was looking for a name. I apologise. Is it David again?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Apologies, David. Thank you.
Chair. This is your usual quarterly risk management report. We've obviously spent some time on the equalities risk in the previous session. I won't go through the appendix, which has got all the risks in there. Just the one risk I was going to point out is that our financial sustainability score has been moved down from a 9 to a 6, following a more favourable settlement and a 3-year settlement that we received at the end of last year. And we've set aside some reserve balances to manage that sort of costs of local government reorganisation and the business rates and income risks. So those are the risks there. I'm not going to go through the appendix, but as usual, happy to take questions from members on that, Chair.
Thank you, David. I know Councillor Mason's already submitted something in advance. Any other questions or anyone else want to speak? No, Councillor Mason, go ahead. Oh, then Councillor Teixeira, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I have already emailed one over, but I have just noticed while I've been looking at this on page 44, the corporate risk heat maps, CRK002B, which is the one I want to ask a question about, is shown as being in one of the brown boxes, but the note on there says it's based on net risk scores, whereas that one is actually a 3 rather than a 6 for its net risk score, so I think it's actually in the wrong box. But the question I wanted to ask was on the same risk, which is basically it was whether or not that net position itself is correct, because you know I know it's been mentioned by officers a number of times that we run a very lean organisation because you know that's the nature of our funding and what we can afford to do to cover all the roles we need to do. And I'm wondering whether that net risk that says the likelihood of staff resources issues is low is correct, because I know I've had a couple of examples for things like maintenance of the grounds at Ashford Cemetery, and say for example our planning enforcement team, I think we had 2 officers and both of them have left. That do we feel like we have obviously we try to mitigate that risk as best we can, but do we have sufficient coverage in roles across the organisation that if people leave or people are sick or the staff turnover, that we are able to cover those things well? Thank you.
Thank you. David, do you want to take that one?
Through you, Chair, and thank you for sending those questions in advance. So I've had the opportunity to look at those 2 particular circumstances and understand that at Ashwood there was some staff sickness, which was rather exceptional because it was more than one member of the team. So there was a dip there, which has now been picked up and mitigated against. I think it's a good point that you raise. And at what point do you carry additional resource in order to mitigate the fact that we may get illness, and you may get a drop in resource. I think in planning enforcement we've also had members of staff leave, which has been covered by agency, and then we've recruited into them. I think it's generally a fact that if somebody does leave, it takes a while to fill that post, even if you move as quickly as you can. Certainly had that around sustainability. We've had a little drop off for a few months. I don't think we're in a position to carry additional staff to move into those positions. As always with risk, it's a discussion about where's the right place to put that. I think the key thing is what the mitigations are that you would put in place. So those examples we've talked about, that would be something to discuss what the appropriate mitigation would be.
If I can just come back on that, Chair. I mean, I guess if we're talking about in terms of the language you talked about earlier, because obviously we're noting this report, but am I prove that I'm assured or resolve that I'm assured in this situation? It's one of those things that's probably the change in language makes me think about this differently in terms of am I assured that we have the staff resources to cover those kind of things? I possibly feel not, and that's maybe something we need to take away and look at. Are there further mitigations, or do we just accept that the risk is what it is because of the situation we're in? But that's something we should then be monitoring as the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Teixeira.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm looking at the cybersecurity risk, which is not surprisingly up in the red hot corner there. I recently did the phishing training that was offered, which is, you know, good. I know we keep logs, but can we be made aware of the extent to which that training is actually being taken up and being, you know, people are not only doing the training but passing the little test at the end? Are we able to know that sort of thing? Thank you.
I mean, certainly that information is available, and I see that, and officers see that quite regularly. And it's something that we talk to group leaders about with regards to members, and we'll also chase up with officers in particular and follow up. So that information is available. I think, yeah, I'll certainly give that some consideration as to, I don't see why this committee shouldn't have sight of that information.
So I think that's a classic case in point where if we were going to note this piece of information, then having the little tool that lets you see, well, is that being managed in the way that we thought it should, think it should? And it's not about language, it's not purely about I'm assured, it's, well, what is my assurance? And, you know, can I say, and also members need to take this training as well, and I'd be surprised if every single member did.
Yeah, Chris, you going to come in there?
Thanks. I'm not sure the extent to which this is appropriate, but I can vouch for what David has said as a you know, as a member of CMT, and I know that there was a managing director email about this at some point, and also we've had reports going round where, you know, if you've got somebody in your team who isn't up to date with those particular courses, then you're asked to pass that on and make sure they complete it.
So is that an assurance for Councillor Barnes?
On that particular point, members get regular updates of if a new training session is made available, and if you don't do it immediately, within a few days you get a reminder, and then if you still don't do it, you get another reminder, so there's no excuse for members not to do it. Is that a process that's in staff as well?
Yes, and I think staff probably have some extra layers on that, where we'll monitor that and go through managers. So we'll take that to corporate management team, and not just for this training, actually, for all of our mandatory training. And we are operating a risk level for this. So if there's more than one course available, it gets escalated. And there's some discussion about what we may put in place in terms of remote access controls. We haven't got to that point of implementing those yet. So obviously, if you're accessing the network from on-site, the risk is lower than if you're accessing the network from off-site. The chances of being phished or compromised are greater.
Okay, any further questions, comments? No, so currently, as per the original wording, we are asked to note the updated assessment of corporate risks at the end of Q4, as shown in the latest corporate risk report, as provided by David. All those in favour of noting the report? Thank you very much. That's carried. Thank you, David. And the next agenda item is the Treasury Management Annual Report 25-26. There are, before I hand over to Cathy, there are 3 recommendations, one of which is not simply noting. We're being asked to refer to full council, so that's more of a genuine vote there. But anyway, we'll park those 3 recommendations for the time being, and I'll hand over to Cathy.
Thank you, Chair. So it's that time of year again where I bring the annual 25-26 Treasury Management Report to you. This details what we do with the council's cash that sits in our bank and how we manage any borrowing that's required. So first of all, to note, we can only take long-term borrowing when we have a need for capital spend. you'll see a table in 3.1 that shows you how we calculate what we need to borrow during the year, and that's based on the capital finance requirement. So it takes into account everything that's in our capital programme, wipes out anything that we've got grant funding for or other types of funding for, and tells us how much we need to borrow, or indicates how much we need to borrow. We also balance that with the cash that sits in our bank account overnight. The sort of headline for 25-26 is, for the first year in a number of years, we did borrow 4 million in February at a really good rate. It shot up the next day and didn't go any lower for the rest of the year. So we were pleased with ourselves on that. So if you go to section 3.6, that talks about our investment activity. And for 25-26, this was mainly about short-term investments. So this is investing any cash balances we have in our bank account each day with different investment organisations. We mainly invested with the Money Marketing Board and the DMO, which is a government investment thing. We're investing with central government potentially. So see all the facts and figures there. I'm not going to go through them one by one, but there's a good summary table in section 3.12 for you to look at, which shows the overall impact of borrowing and investments during the year. And then at the end, we just briefly talk about the beginning of 26-27 Treasury activity, how we've set our budget and on what basis. And you'll see in paragraph 4.1, we're expecting to borrow more this year. We're keeping a good monitor on our cash balances overnight, but we do expect to have to borrow some more cash in this financial year, particularly on the basis that we had a lot of grants in previous years, and now those grants have run out because we've delivered all of the things in the capital programme that they were given for. So that's what, we don't know how much we need to borrow. We will monitor our cash balances throughout the year, but we do know we need to borrow something more this financial year. And then finally, on Appendix A, Appendix 1, you have your prudential indicators that we have to share with you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you for the report. Any questions from any members? Councillor Sarah, first of all.
Thank you. So yes, this is a noting report, so a bit like a state record tonight, obviously. If audit and governance doesn't actually have to approve the Treasury management, don't know what this is. This is an update on the position, I guess. Then who does? Is it all wrapped up within the annual budget and it all gets wrapped up, and this is actually a delegated responsibility because you're the experts to make it all fit together and to know when you have to go to the markets and when you don't?
Essentially, this information also goes to P&R. I don't know if that answers your question.
Do they note it as well?
It's as part of the quarterly reports, so yes.
Okay, I've got some queries about the whole process, I suppose. But not for now, not for now.
Okay, thank you both. Any more questions, comments? No, okay. Everyone's satisfied. Thank you, Kathy. It's a hugely complex report, so thank you for all that effort. And it is very clear, but I'm not going to pretend to have the same background that you have to understand every single line. But I would want to make that comment that it is, very well laid out and very in-depth. So thank you very much. And thank you for condensing it just now. So as I said, we've got 3 recommendations. First one is to note the report. I think I'll take them all together if that's okay. So to note the report, to agree to refer the full, to refer the annual report for 25-26 Treasury Management to full council for information on the 14th of July. And finally, recommendation is to note the latest 26-27 position, yes, regarding Treasury Management. So all recommendations in a bundle. Do we all agree those recommendations? Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kathy. Do bear with. So it's over to Sian. It's the annual governance statement. Oh, no, excuse me. I scrolled too far down. I apologise, Chris. Stealing your thunder again. I apologise. It's the internal audit report, isn't it? But I want to read it properly. Yeah. Apologies. It's the annual report of internal audit for 25-26, and indeed it's over to Chris Green. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So this report brings together the work that internal audit have carried out over the last year. It's required by the global internal audit standards, and we have to give an annual opinion on the council's internal control, governance and risk management, and that actually then informs the annual governance statement, which is the next item on the agenda. We have to summarise the work we carry out and the basis of our opinion. We must also cover compliance with the global internal auditing standards. I'm pleased to say the annual opinion is a reasonable level of assurance, so that's a positive result. All of the audits that we carried out resulted in either substantial or reasonable level of assurance. Management have been good at implementing recommendations, as 100% implementation on time for those that where we've checked after the implementation date. No significant governance weaknesses have been identified during the course of the year, and we've also noted the strengthening of the risk management framework. As members of course know, risk management now sits with this committee, and we've had a number of deep dives at this committee over the course of the year, which strengthen the arrangements as well as a new risk management strategy. Pages 12 to 22 show a summary for each audit. Most of those have already been presented during the course of the year, and full reports are included in the members' shared area. We've met our service performance targets, so the audit plan has been delivered in full. The service productivity gone up to 87%, and also we had a 92% customer satisfaction rating, and again I'd like to express my thanks to the team for an excellent performance. In terms of quality assurance, we're required to confirm compliance with our quality assurance and improvement programme, which was approved by this committee back in September 2024. That's covered in section 4, and I can confirm our compliance with that. I'm also required to confirm our independence and objectivity and how we ensure this, and that's set out within section 5 at page 10 in the appendix. Finally, we had an action plan to embed compliance with the new global internal auditing standards. That's also covered within section 4 of appendix A. We've had whole team training on integrity and objectivity this year. We've also developed that new internal audits charter, strategy and mandate, which was approved by this committee at the last meeting. And therefore, I've concluded general conformance to the internal auditing standards. Members are asked to note the report, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and to your team as well. Councillor May, straight in there. You've already submitted, but I think it's appropriate to share what you've submitted in advance so the other members can hear them. And yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you for the report. I did particularly want to highlight on the thing you mentioned on page 75, which is point 3.4, that that all of the targets have been exceeded and 100% of agreed recommendations have been implemented. So that's testament to the work of internal audit and the management team as well. So that's great. I think it stands in marked contrast to what I heard at a county council meeting where they'd had this transformation report, and one of the things that it mentioned was that too often management of the county council treats internal audit recommendations as optional, and I think an indication of why they've ended up in the situation they have. I do think as we go through LGR, it's really important that the new body that gets formed embeds the attitude to internal audit that we have in this body in it, and not the county councils. And with that in mind, have there been any discussions of our shared service taking on the internal audit work for the county? Because if we're picking and choosing what works well across the county, it seems that we do this well and they don't. So is that a discussion we've had? And then I have a second question, but we can come back on that one first.
Thank you, Councillor, and through you, Chair. The short answer to that is we haven't had any conversations of that nature, although I don't, and others may have done, but I'm certainly not aware of that. But I'd like to say thanks for the confidence that you show in the service. That means a lot to me and I know to the whole team. Obviously, I have a vested interest in this area, but all I can say is that myself and the team are focused on being the best that we can be and being in the best possible place for local government reorganisation, and that's why we focus on performance, why we focus on delivery, and why we've also got a big focus on staff professional and personal development. We do have, on September the 18th, there is a meeting called Working Together on Reorganisation that's been hosted here by Worcester City Council, where all the senior managers across local government in Worcestershire will be meeting together in person. So I imagine those are the sorts of conversations that may well start around that time alongside many other areas of consideration. One other thing just to highlight to members is that my role is evolving. So I've been asked to pick up the LGR Data Hub work stream for Worcestershire, but that will actually help myself and the team and those around me to gain more knowledge and insight around operations across Worcestershire as we move towards the LGR vesting date. I'll still be the head of a shared service, but what we are doing is recruiting internally to a team leader post to ensure that we've got that ongoing service resilience and continuity even of support to the team.
Before you come in, Councillor Mace, thank you for that response, Chris. So you've got this meeting on the 18th of September, which is specifically about local government reorganisation. I just wondered, given how well you're doing as an internal audit service, I wonder whether that's an opportunity for officers and possibly councillors to do a bit of a sales pitch to say to other people within the county, you know, other representatives of other councils, we're really good at this. Can we do more of it? You know, and that's the 18th September. The meeting's already scheduled. Would it be appropriate for you to make that you know, invitation, and would councillors from this committee or elsewhere, would they say, you know, our internal audit service is good. I think we should branch out and do some audits for you, or am I just barking up the wrong tree?
Through you, Chair. The agenda will be set by the Chief Execs, and it's a getting to know you meeting. I think if Chris did a vigorous sales pitch, they might go, who was that guy on that agenda? Working together, obviously, and shared services is something that the City Council is really keen on. In relation to small corporate professional services teams as well, we've really been encouraging that in the last few years as we've had savings targets to hit, for example. But obviously other local authority partners adjacent to us are in different positions financially, so there hasn't necessarily been an imperative to share any more than we are doing. I think it's just now a matter of time, isn't it, before we are reorganised and shared services become new services. So if Chris can carry on being excellent, then that's the best thing to do. But the 18th of September is a very specific event, and don't think this would be the place for that conversation.
Thank you. Thought I'd ask. Councillor Mace?
Yeah, I'm sure Neil, we could do a sales pitch to our county colleague in St Stephen, who, if he doesn't have enough on his plate, could think about this. The other question I had was just on contract management. So that was one of the things we did a report on this year. So how do we ensure that not just compliance around payments, that also the terms of the contract are being kept? So as an example of why this is important, one of my previous jobs was working for a company that did payment provision for local authorities and housing associations. And quite often larger bodies would negotiate 3-day payment terms where somebody would pay their rent in the post office and they wanted the money in the bank account in 3 days. And that would get signed off in the contract. And then the company I worked for would pay them after 10 days, even though it was a contract in 3 days, because no one checked. And then they could earn some extra money on that. So what kind of measures do we look at to ensure that the terms of the contracts we sign are actually being kept to?
Thank you. And through you, Chair, firstly, thank you for the advance notice of the question, because it gave me a chance to actually look back at the audit file and report. So the scope for the review included assurance that there are robust and consistently applied arrangements in place to ensure contract terms are constantly met. So it's obviously broad, but depending on the terms and conditions of specific contracts in the sample that they were looked at. However, for half of the contracts, unfortunately, there was no contract and/or extension letter available for us, so we couldn't confirm for those. But for the other half, we were able to confirm that the terms and conditions were being complied with. What I will say in terms of the contracts that weren't available to us is that with upcoming LGR and a newly implemented contract management system, I expect that to be resolved, because the paperwork and so on has all got to be sorted out, ready for LGR.
Thank you both. Councillor Barnes? Councillor Chagan?
How are we doing compared to other district councils and the county council as far as this document's concerned? Because we've got lots of green and a few oranges, but they're heading in the right direction as far as I can see. But how are our colleagues doing?
You're doing well. I haven't done a benchmarking exercise as such for the shared service, but you're right up there towards the top of the pile, if not the top. I can't say the top because I haven't actually looked across the whole piece, and I haven't actually written all the annual reports yet. Yours is the first in the current cycle, but you are doing well towards the top for Worcestershire. I think what is pleasing, and just to come back to some of the earlier conversation, is the management approach to internal audit. They're taken really seriously, and you get, in some places you might find that almost the reports are nodded through, and that's not necessarily a good thing, because here what we have is quite a long, we have a lot of conversations actually about the contents of our reports. There's a lot of check and challenge, and a lot of genuine discussion about actually how do we go about implementing this and actually addressing the issue. And sometimes you get, for example, the report we were talking about earlier, that had a dedicated session last week at the corporate management team, and that is something that doesn't happen elsewhere.
Just before I invite Councillor Jagger, is that to do with the political will of the councillors on whichever authority, or is it purely down to the commitment of the officers? I mean, is it both? I mean, so it's great to hear you say how brilliant we are at auditing, but I'm just wondering why that's not uniform. Is that the political leadership, or is that officer competency, or is it both?
I think it's a mixture of both, to be honest. And another thing that I'll just mention that helps is actually this committee is very interested as well. You know, the quality of the discussion and debate that takes place is high in my view, and I think that helps as well. So, you know, kudos to you guys as well, actually.
Yeah, I was just teeing you up to praise us all. Yeah. So, thank you, Chris. salary increase over here. Councillor Jagger, then Councillor Teixeira.
I wonder if I can ask a question about something that is on the summary of internal audit findings, particularly on page 82. I don't know if we have the same. I can read out. Yes? I have asked this question privately, and one of your colleagues have already replied it for the purposes of the public record. I'll just ask it now. So in this table, it says that at the time of the audit, there were 63 card holders. So this is relating to purchase cards. And the total spend on purchasing cards for the period of 2020 to 25 was just over £1 million. And there was some concerns that the limits set for card holders were very wide-ranging, between £500 and £25,000, and there was an acknowledgement that higher limits were for officers purchasing temporary accommodation. So I've had a conversation about this, and I was quite assured by the information that I was given and what the council was doing to address some of the concerns around this. But if you could just give us a briefing of what the issue was around the purchasing cards and what the council is doing, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The main concern with purchasing cards is the risk of fraud. And so naturally, from an auditing perspective, you're looking to have tight control over the number of card holders, the credit limits and the controls around receipt provision and so on and so forth. And that's really, there's an inherent level of risk there. There's also risk in terms of compliance with procurement rules and achieving value for money. There's the risk an officer could go off and buy, I've seen, not here, but examples of things like white goods being procured en masse through purchasing cards rather than actually going down a proper procurement route. So given those risks, you're looking for relatively tight control. Now, the important thing to stress is that through the review that we did, and our sample testing would include what's called biased samples. So you're looking at descriptions, for example, against purchasers in selecting the sample. We didn't find any examples of potentially fraudulent expenditure. So there's clearly a decent level of assurance there. But all we're looking for really is that sense of review and control over the number of card holders. In terms of temporary accommodation, absolutely understand, if you've got a situation where somebody needs a roof over their head, you get the roof over their head, and there'll be situations where that's absolutely necessary. But it's that sense of ongoing review, is it still the right number of card holders? 63 is quite high. This is a review that we've done elsewhere in Worcestershire, and 63 is high. So, we would like to see that pared down, and there is a management review in progress. And there's also been a new policy on purchase card use that's been introduced. And I think particularly where you've got officers who've had a card for a long period of time, it doesn't do any harm to reinforce actually these are the rules that you've signed up to. Because if anything does ever go wrong, one of the first defences can often be, oh, we didn't know what the rules were. Well, actually what this shows is the rules have been reviewed, updated, and officers have been told what they are. So that can't be an excuse.
Thank you both. Councillor Teixeira?
I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to say this is a classic example of something we should be approving. We actually approved the strategy, so why would we not approve the progress that we've got here as an example rather than just a note? That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, of all the reports, to have more option, whether not just to note but actually to be assured. I think this is probably the best example, arguably, in the whole agenda, where given that it's an audit of the whole council, it's not just about noting; it's about receiving assurance. So I agree with you, but I'm not
and
quite
having
sure
received that assurance, yeah.
I wonder, are we using the word noted as implicitly saying we are assured? Or are we getting into semantics that is too late to get into tonight? I don't know. I'm looking at Sian actually. Would we, as a committee or even as a council, would we have to have a separate debate about using different terminology for committee reports? Because I do absolutely take the point.
No, I think it's within your jurisdiction as a committee. I would encourage us to not spend an hour on it tonight. So what I was going to suggest was that the annual report from the Audit Committee, you remember that the committee reports to the full council on its work programme, so that's coming up. So why don't we use the space between tonight and full council to agree a different form of words that the committee would like to use going forward, and we can just let full council know that that's what you're going to do.
Fantastic, thank you. So can it be a straightforward, and I know this is kind of a separate, sorry Chris, but it's important. Can we just replace one word for another? So instead of noted, this committee is assured by, which is a simpler version of the example we shared. Or open it to members. Is there a better alternative to noted? And I take John's point, we don't want an hour debate on this. But is there a better alternative to noted and assured by? Or Amolia's? Assured by? I mean, I just plucked that from the sky. And this is not just for this particular item, this is going forward as an audit. Yeah. At that point, Karen sensibly leaves. Very sensible. Strap in, come on.
Everyone's got their line.
There's football on, yeah. Thank you very much, Karen. Safe journey. Councillor Jagger, then Councillor Mace.
Just a question, will we get to know the outcome of the review of the number of purchase cards that they are and the limits and how that progresses? Will that be in a future report as the process takes place?
So our usual process isn't usually to report on specific actions that have been agreed. We normally report by exception. We automatically review every action that's graded medium or high priority based on level of risk. But that doesn't mean that we can't do that in this case. We can absolutely do that through one of the progress reports as and when the agreed date falls due. I'll make a note that we can do that. But yeah, as a matter of course, we don't usually. But the exception is where we've given limited assurance. If we've given limited assurance, we will always do a full follow-up review the following year and with a report and a regrade. Because of course, limited, you want to see evidence of progress in those areas, because that means we've identified some significant gaps and weaknesses in internal control.
And I think that reminder that we do it by exception is itself assurance. But yeah, Councillor Mace, thank you, Chris.
Just on terminology, I mean, at least when I went on the audit training, they would talk about filling our bucket of assurance. So I think assurance is the correct terminology to be used, because that's what we're as a council, as a committee, especially providing to the whole council, that we are assured that our internal processes and governance are correct. So I think that's a sensible term to use.
Thank you. So, unless there are any other questions, comments about the substantive item, we'll move to the recommendation, which would now be that this committee is assured by the annual report to maternal audit 25-26, and that will be minuted. So are we all assured by the report that Chris has put together? Grand. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you all. Perfect. And before I move on to the next item, is that now the template for all of the items after that one? Assured by instead of noted, yeah?
I don't know if it would be always
within my
appropriate.
gift to do that, somehow.
I just want to give the classic legal advice, it depends.
Okay, right, Okay, well, I'll take it one by one and I'll see if it's appropriate to rephrase. Okay, perfect, thank you. So it's now over to Sian for the annual governance statement 25-26. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this report provides, this is indeed a piece of the assurance framework. It provides a look back on the activities that have been undertaken in the previous 12 months, which show that good governance leads to better outcomes in service delivery and the management of public funds. So it isn't supposed to be just a document that outlines what our governance arrangements are, but what the outcomes have been by having good governance. The committee will recall it's based on the CIPFA framework, and the front end of the document really walks through the way we're set up. And then from section 3 onwards, largely you get into, so what has the last 12 months looked like? When I say 12 months, obviously it's the municipal year 25 to 26. And so inevitably, as you read this, you respond to it thinking, oh, that was quite a long time ago in aspects. But I think it still holds good in terms of the narrative for Worcester City Council. Clearly, I mean, some points to pull out from it. I'm not going to go through it all. We've understood the point from the external auditors who are now in post that they're working on this build back programme to get us to assurance, full assurance over this 3-year period. So that's obviously referenced in here. But we also comment on the fact that the local authority officer team and the audit committee do their best to provide the external auditors with all the information they require, you know, to follow the timescales as best as we can, play our part. Obviously, in terms of the look back, it's a recognition that we had some additional external scrutiny of our governance in this period, and that was in the form of the Local Government Association Corporate Peer Challenge. So this is a whole 12 months ago now, really, that we had that result, but it frames the start of this year. And I've put in the governance statement, obviously, the fact that sector-led improvement is largely the environment within which local authorities work at the moment. That could change in the future, but we've talked here as an audit committee in the past about the best value duty, the underlying best value duty from the 1999 legislation, and how sometimes, you know, at the extreme end, commissioners are brought in to oversee the governance of an organisation. Largely, the control environment in local government is a sort of self-help environment. So sector-led improvement initiatives, not every council signs up to have a corporate peer challenge, but most do, and then the results are published on the website. So it is a transparent process. I know it was a while ago now, so I'm just going to, you know, there's a number of extracts in there which demonstrate the kind of breadth of the governance strength. You'll remember the overall finding is Worcester City Council is well led politically and managerially with a good reputation for the delivery of services. There is a huge amount for the council to be proud of, and it is ambitious for the future of the city. So again, there's sort of outward outcome looking approach to good governance. So again, just in terms of some other points in the annual governance statement, you know, we can't get very far through this sort of document without commenting on our financial position. As we reflected in relation to the corporate risk item earlier, the financial position is improved relative to previous years. It is still not a strong position, in as much as every year we have to identify savings, and we always have a challenge to set a balanced budget. So the new settlement position hasn't relieved the sort of pressure, but in the short term it's meant that we are in a less bleak position than we thought we were before. We are now looking against a shorter timetable because, of course, the other key thing that's happened since we last published an annual governance statement is the timetable for reorganisation has really picked up pace. And the dates that were published in the white paper do appear to be the dates that will be used. Therefore, Worcester City Council will be abolished by April 2028, as we all know. Whilst we await the government's verdict on what shape we should be, and then we start to get into the operational process of reorganisation, you know, the detail of that and the new governance arrangements in shadow form. Again, the report obviously acknowledges that attention has also turned locally to what is the local level of governance and representation that survives Worcester City Council, and the enthusiasm within this committee and elsewhere for looking at parish and town council levels of governance. Then there are a number of other standard things that we report against, you know, low level of upheld complaints, no significant legal action brought against the council, health and safety compliance, the things that would feature on a dashboard in terms of, you know, benchmarks of good governance. Consultation and engagement, you know, again, our commitment to face-to-face engagement, consultation, to the extent that that's proportionate for our level of service delivery. Recognising also that we have tried and we've been successful in securing investment into the city against our corporate plans. So we can demonstrate that it's been very helpful for us as far back as the Worcester City Master Plan to have a master plan, a city plan, an environmental strategy, an EDI strategy, a play plan, a South Worcestershire development plan, just as some examples of plans, documents, strategies that have helped lever in funding for the city and enabled us to be agile when there is a funding opportunity to align that with our objectives. And I think it's really, it's testament to where the local authority political leadership has got to, that across the committee system, a city plan was developed, redrafted and approved, you know, I think almost unanimously or unanimously across the chamber. That's where we've got to through the committee system and the cross-party working. I think that's a real strength of Worcester. So again, but in terms of outcomes, it's about investment delivery, having a local plan to guide you know, where housing and employment sites will be allocated, having funding for regeneration programmes, doing work in relation to equality, as we've heard. These are things about the outcomes and the outputs that are supposed to help us ultimately meet our best value duty in terms of the money that we receive, the services we provide. And then I think obviously we've spoken a little bit about capacity and leadership already, and I think again the deep dive process adds a lot of value to that. There's that teamwork culture. I think the challenge between councillors and officers to make sure that there is a culture of continuous improvement, very good level of attendance by councillors at committee meetings, very good level of participation by staff in training courses, things like a windfall that there was some external apprenticeship funding gifted to the council as an unspent levy from elsewhere, for which a large cohort of staff have benefited from additional professional qualifications. So it's been a good year in terms of, I suppose, some additional capacity development. We've talked about risk management already. We've talked about scorecards, I think, earlier on the agenda. I think overall, you know, I think it's probably just the point to pause and reflect that there are always significant governance issues. If we had to look further ahead in terms of the setting of a balanced budget than now reorganisation, we would find that very challenging because our funding only really takes us as far as reorganisation in terms of the medium-term financial plan. And we know that we now have the kind of duality of wanting to deliver all of this council's priorities whilst being prepared to have a influential voice in reorganisation. And reorganisation, as you know, in terms of the creation of a new unitary, is itself supposed to be just a building block to having a conversation with government through combined authorities and devolution. So, you know, good governance and being really clear on your outcomes for your communities is clearly going to be, you know, the agenda for the next few years. We've identified governance challenges and priorities for the year ahead. As I say, local government reorganisation, the external audit process, completion of programmes, responding to new legislation, etc. So, Chair, I'm going to pause there. I'm obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sean. Just before I invite questions and comments, I would say to anyone who's still dutifully watching this meeting from in their own homes, that this report is a brilliant summary of what the council's been up to. So if anyone's got a question outside of this building, what does Worcester City Council do? Why is it relevant to me? Then read this report and you'll get a very good answer. So yeah, thank you very much, Sean, for the report and the summary just now. Any questions and further comments? Councillor Mace.
you've sold my point that I was going to make about the sheer breadth of things that we do and all the hard work that goes in. So I'll just reiterate that. The very minor thing I can't get through a whole meeting without bringing up a pedantry point or a typographic point, there's a minor amendment I think needed to 320 in the annual governance statement, which is the first sentence appears to be missing some words and the second sentence doesn't specify which committee is overseeing the work. So it currently says, the Council continues to deliver actions to meet its being an excellent local leader in equality, diversity and inclusion. That probably just needs tidying up, and the work of officers is overseen by committee. It doesn't say which committee, so I think that's probably just a couple of minor things that need fixing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, page 105, 3.20. Yeah, 20, yeah, Sean, sorry.
Yes, through you, Chair. Yes, thank you. The first sentence is supposed to be deliver its actions to meet its commitment of being, but it could be phrased better, to meet its commitment to be an excellent local leader. And the work is overseen by the Policy and Resources Committee that receives an annual report. I'll tidy that up. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any further questions, comments? I think I've made mine. Just thanks again. There's a huge amount going on, and it has gone on, sorry, and will go on. So, and thanks very much for the report. So I don't need to be in a dilemma about the wording because we've got different wording anyway. So the recommendation for this report is that the committee approves the annual governance statement, 25-26, for sign off by the leader of the council and the managing director for inclusion in the annual statement of accounts. And is that the only recommendation? I'm sure. I see two. Yes, it is this one. So do we approve the statement as per what I've just read out? Yes, we do. Thank you very much. Grand. Thank you, Sean. The night is getting long, but we move on to what is going to spark a debate, as is, our right. So agenda item 10, as per the original agenda, we're going to discuss potential amendment to the Constitution procedure for motions. And I don't know who's leading on this item. Is that you again? It must be you, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's the Audit and Governance Committee, so we will focus on the governance aspect tonight. Obviously, it's a function of the monitoring officer to advise on the Constitution, which can also include making recommendations for changes to the Constitution or bringing forward proposals that others have made. So this isn't a proposal that's been initiated by officers, it's been initiated by members, but it seems appropriate to lay out what the proposal is and for this committee, the Audit and Governance Committee, to consider it. If the committee is minded to make changes, then obviously, as you know, those changes would have to be approved by the full council, and therefore the report doesn't comment on whether changes should be made or not, but it says if you decide to make changes, that delegated authority would then be given to me in consultation with Chair and Vice Chair to finalise the wording of those changes for referral to full council. So in terms of what's proposed, it's a proposal to amend, here we go, it's a proposal to amend the procedure for the amendment of motions. Part 4 of the Constitution deals with debate at council and therefore it deals with motions. There is a clear procedure for the submission of motions, and of course that has been looked at in recent years by members here, and that process has been improved in as much as number of days before a meeting and wording has been looked at, so that section of the Constitution has been reviewed by members who are experienced in the chamber, and the process for bringing motions has definitely been improved and clarified. There isn't a set process for the amendments other than what happens during the course of debate within the meeting itself, where what the Constitution is focused on is describing how amendments will be brought and whether the extent to which amendments are permissible. And there's this phrase in terms of amendments to motions, which actually comes from one of the sort of definitive textbooks on local authority decision-making, which then appears, therefore, in everyone's constitutions around the country, which is that the whole parameter around a motion is that it shouldn't have the effect of negating the original motion. So the magic words are, whatever you do, don't negate the original motion. So broadly otherwise, amending motions is expected as part of what happens within the chamber, that within the debate, and it's expected that motions will be brought forward and that they will be debated. Therefore, there's a section in the Constitution around time limits and so forth. But that's as far as the Constitution goes. Members have raised the point about large amendments being tabled and substantive amendments that could, you know, when they've gone through the printer, you know, one or more pages, lots of track changes. And the point that's been made by members is that that can be quite impactful for people in the room trying to absorb that information. That may or may not be people who are neurodivergent. They may be people who have other processing challenges. It may just be because it's a long, tiring night and it's just another document to absorb. But the point was made was that if by the time the council meets, people are aware that they're going to bring substantive amendments, then those amendments could have been discussed before the meeting, which would have given everyone in the room more notice and time to consider them. I mean, support for that view is given, I think, probably I would suggest by the group leaders protocol, which is another section of the Constitution, which talks about how there is, you know, a kind of commitment to collaborative working. It doesn't say a principle of no surprises, but it's the idea that agenda setting and work will be collaborative. But I think in contrast to that is the idea that the committee system is managing the service business of the council, whether that's services, policies, risks like tonight, whereas the council chamber is a place for motions on matters of political interest to councillors. They broadly have to relate to the business of the council, but not fully, as we know, and that's something that's been discussed before. But it's a different space, and it's doing a different thing. So, you know, on the one hand, you could say that the principle is no surprises before a meeting. On the other hand, you could say it's a political space, and the expectation is that debate will change motions, and that's the environment within which people need to be ready to operate. When you look at what's in other people's constitutions, largely other authorities' constitutions are like Worcester's in that they don't suggest that any particular procedure has to happen before a meeting around amendments. Largely constitutions look like ours do. There are one or two, well there's a few, where they make a distinction between a minor amendment being made and a substantive amendment being made, and they suggest that a substantive amendment could be ruled out of order by the chair of the meeting if notice hadn't been given of it. In my benchmarking, those are the minority cases, but there are some. So I need to say that. The rest of the report just tries to envisage the sort of practical implications of putting something like that in our constitution, and I do have to make the point, I don't think that's our culture at Worcester, but I do think that a procedure that puts more parameters around amendments could easily be circumvented with mischief making. So, you know, I don't mean that in any sort of negative sense, but somebody could sit there and say, well, I didn't bring my substantive amendment before, but I can actually just sit here and tell you what my substantive amendment is and read it out. And then what can the chair do except say, thank you very much. So, you know, because the chair in full council has got a sort of civic role to encourage debate in the chamber, and it's not along party lines. So I think there is a bit of a scenario where it could be quite difficult to enforce something if it's put into the Constitution. I've suggested that an alternative to amendments before meetings could be for the chair to be empowered to automatically call an adjournment if a substantive amendment is tabled, and say, in fairness to everybody, we need an adjournment. Again, I mean, the chair, the mayor, always has the discretion to call an adjournment, but they tend to read the room, and if it's coming early in the meeting, they might think, I don't think everyone wants an adjournment. But the Constitution might say you have to, in the interest of the people that need to read it and digest it. So that's a different position. And I think really, I mean, there's a number of other points that could be made, but there are clearly pros and cons. So I'm going to pause there. It really, I think, is for members here tonight to express their views, and then to work out, I guess, you know, whether you have something that you want to put to the vote tonight as a sort of direction of travel that the wording can then be brought. If there isn't a proposal to amend substantively, then this falls away tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sean. So just before I do invite members to get involved in the debate, because clearly this demands a debate, I just want to highlight the recommendations, of which there are two. One is that the committee considers proposals from members to amend the procedure for motions. We're about to do that because we're going to have a debate. So one is done. Two, the second recommendation is that if the committee decides to make changes to the way motions are submitted, then, as Sean's just alluded to, delegated authorities given to the monitoring officer in consultation with the chair and vice chair of this committee to finalise the wording of the proposed changes. So there will be an actual vote as to whether we, push this down the line, that whether this carries on towards possibly becoming part of the Constitution. So we're going to have a debate right now. Councillor Mason strayed in there, but I want to make sure we've got other expressions of interest. Councillor Lamb, Councillor Desera, Councillor Jagger. And I appreciate it's 20 to 10 now, but, we've had a packed agenda and this deserves a debate. So, yeah, let's crack on. So, Councillor Mace.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sean, for the introduction and the production of the report. I'm hoping, as I'm sitting on my own here in the corner, I'm not going to look like a madman ranting away in the corner about this, but I want to talk about why I think these changes are needed and why we need to look at this. So, I'm very proud to serve on this council. It's a diverse council, the mix of experiences, not just in diversity of gender and sexuality and race, but with councillors with neurodiversity, dyslexia and other diagnoses. And we should be proud, as we've heard already this evening, of being an excellent local leader in equality, inclusion and diversity. Now, what we are suggesting here is an improvement to the constitution of this council to reflect the experiences of members and improve how it works for those with diagnoses covered by the Equality Act 2010. Where reasonable adjustments should be made to allow them to do their job properly. And we've also heard about the public sector equality duty this evening, where we have an obligation to advance equality of opportunity and participation in public life as part of that. And what we're seeking here with these reasonable adjustments is to support councillors with processing challenges when considering large amendments to motions. So to quote the 2 points in the report that I think particularly specific to this, 2.2 specifically, the point being raised was about extensive text amendments to motions being tabled on the night of the meeting, and 2.4, the change proposed by members was that amendments, where known before a council meeting, should need to be submitted prior to that council meeting. Now, this committee is, in theory, independent and not party political, so I'm not going to get into who's done what, but in the last few years, we have had multiple examples of long, detailed amendments being introduced during the debate of the motion. And in general, those aren't amendments to clarify language or clear up uncertainty, but are instead amendments that add or remove entire sections of motions. And they're handed out during the meeting for consideration. Now, the reasonable adjustment that we're seeking is that as these amendments were clearly written before the debate and printed before the debate and before the meeting started, that they are circulated sometime before the meeting starts so that all councillors, including those with processing challenges, are able to fully digest them before the meeting starts. And I want to talk about what isn't intended, what I'm not looking for with these constitution changes. So I know that some people are concerned about the effect of this proposal is that members will be unable to respond to debate and make consequent changes to motions as part of the meeting. And I don't personally believe that that's true. That's not the aim of what we're going for here. If I can quote the original change that was suggested to the Constitution when this was originally raised with Sean, it was any proposed amendments to motions must be delivered to the Democratic and Civic Services Manager at least 3 clear working days before the meeting. The proposed amendments should also be sent to all group leaders. Later amendments may still be allowed, even if they are raised directly at council meetings. However, these should be limited to clarifying changes rather than insertion, modification or deletion of multiple clauses. So to be clear, even this original proposal was explicitly clear that amendments are still allowed during the meeting to allow for changes in response to debate, and it was intended as a starting point for debate to make reasonable adjustments. So I'm not attached to that wording or those timescales or even the point about the insertion, modification and deletion of multiple clauses. It's about where can we get to of setting reasonable expectations before the meeting of amendments being shared before we get into the meeting. Which, to quote the report again, I think which is what is covered in 3.7. So several instances were identified where local authority constitutions have made a distinction between substantive amendments requiring notice to be given before the meeting and minor amendments which could be given during the meeting. So in terms of what this looks like, to me, a substantive amendment is what I have already described, one that is prepared and printed before the meeting that changes multiple clauses of a motion. I'm sure we can all think of examples where this has happened. So to me, this is about, as I said, setting expectations about how we operate to the benefit of all, so that because often reasonable adjustments and accessibility work makes it easier for everyone, as well as being more professional in how we operate. And we talked to, Sean mentioned about continuous improvement as part of the annual governance statement. I think this is again looking at continuous improvement and how we operate. Ultimately, if the situation arose that required relaxing of these rules, the Mayor retains the ultimate decision on whether things are in order or not, but I think that should be the exception and not the rule. I have plenty of other things I could talk about this evening, but it's already late, so I'll wait and see what else comes up, and I reserve the right to come back and talk a bit more about any other things that come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mate. I've forgotten the order. I think it's Councillor Lamb next.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I've been on this council sort of just over 16 years now, and I've been on both sides of this, both as a councillor and as the mayor, chairing meetings, and I hear what's being said here, and it is very irritating, I appreciate sometimes, to have these amendments. I just don't agree with this as a solution, I have to say. You get these amendments which come, and usually what happens, as is stated under 3.3, there is a discussion between leaders of groups, and there is a bit of back and forth. We've been there as councillors. Lynn will go in and meet with the leader of the Liberal Democrats, leader of the Greens, and then she'll come back and say, yeah, they're happy about that, or no, they want to stick with the original thing. So there's already to and fro ahead of the meeting. And then sometimes it does come before the meeting, and it's irritating. What I don't like is when people, if it's a substantial amendment, people haven't typed it out, and then we're all running around getting Julian to sort of print stuff off. So that element is irritating. I appreciate that, and I think if there are going to be substantial amendments, they do need to be set out and given to the meeting when we get there. In terms of people taking time to process information, again, I hear what's said here. So I actually think that the most sensible solution is under 3.6, where, as we've already said, the mayor does already have the kind of custom and practice expectation that if they read the room and they feel people want to go away and put heads together and read something in more detail and consult with their fellow councillors about how they want to vote on an amendment, then that opportunity does lie with the mayor. I suppose what I would support as a kind of compromise is to almost codify that and sort of say, right, okay, well, let's have a mechanism, because sometimes the mayor might think, well, no, everyone's happy, and they're like, well, hang on, they're not. So perhaps to codify it and put a proper mechanism in by which, a little bit like, when we ask for a named vote, a certain number of councillors stand up, 5 people stand up and say, well, I would like to call for an adjournment in order for people to go away for however long it takes to actually examine this, have a conversation, make sure people know what they're voting for. So I personally believe that would be a better compromise to really codify in the Constitution something we've already got, but there to be a mechanism by which councillors can force the mayor, if you like, into taking that action if the mayor, for whatever reason, decided that they weren't going to do it using their sort of power of their sort of prerogative power, for want of a better word, that they've already got. So I wouldn't support the proposal of 3 days. I think it just extends it out too much. But I think changing the Constitution to require an adjournment is a fair compromise.
Okay, just going to check, Sean, does that be a potential amendment to the amendment about amendments?
I think
I knew we'd have this discussion.
Councillor Lamb suggested a really practical mechanism, which could be, in the event that an amendment is tabled, any 5 councillors may call for an adjournment. But it could also be less than 5 councillors, because I said there would be a presumption in favour of an adjournment where a complex or lengthy amendment had been tabled. So almost it could just be, it could say, in the event that a substantive amendment is tabled, the Mayor shall call an adjournment, and then almost it would just be, if someone say, point of order, Mayor, you're supposed to call an adjournment. So it could just be, you know, it could just be written in that the Mayor should do that, and then it would be, if somebody say, point of order, I think you're supposed to call an adjournment.
So can I just, sorry, so can I just ask a question then? So would it be up to you as the monitoring officer to distinguish between a substantial and minor amendment then? That would be your, yeah, okay.
Okay, just before we come in, Zoe, I think I can't check it, Sarah, by all means come in, I'm just checking.
It was just because it was on that point. Rather than make it automatic, because there might be times when nobody wants to do it and it just drags the meeting out, could you have it on the request of one single member rather than you need 5? It's all, if one member requests it, it then becomes an automatic one, because there may be times where it might be that there isn't a debate and we don't want to have an automatic adjournment when nobody wants it. But if you just had it as one person when there's an amendment, it becomes an automatic at the request of one. It just makes it gives us an opt-out of not having to adjourn if nobody wants to.
Any member may request an adjournment in the event that a substantive amendment is tabled.
Can I just come back on that? Is 1 too few? I'm just a bit concerned about one. Well, I did. You may say that I couldn't possibly comment. I'm just a bit mindful that we count 2 as a group, and I'm just a bit mindful if just one person out of 35 decides they just want to be. I don't know. I think that I agree with that. I don't think it should be automatic. I agree. I don't think it should be automatic. There should be a mechanism, and we use 5, isn't it a 5 for a named vote, for example? I mean, that figure's come from somewhere. Why? I think it has to be, it's not automatic, but a certain number of it, you'll get, well, whatever the number might be. But I looked at 5 because it's consistent with calling for a named vote. And with 35 councillors, you'll easily get 5. I mean, people aren't unreasonable.
5 appears twice in the Constitution. It's 5 to request a meeting, 5 for a named vote. 2 also appears, doesn't it? A proposer and a seconder. There is a scenario where in the chamber, I don't know, I feel as an officer observing the chamber, it's the contribution of individuals rather than groups as well that is appreciated within the chamber. So I wouldn't worry, I wouldn't want it to become a group scenario. So yes, we can, ultimately that can be delegated to Chair and Vice Chair to agree what number is recommended to full council.
Just before I invite, I think it was Councillor Jagger, surely that conversation about codifying procedure as suggested just now depends on the vote on the initial suggestion. If the initial suggestion on the agenda tonight is passed, then this talk about codifying other potential procedures is null and void because we're mandating a process. So can we park that one for now? I mean, I'm not invalidating what you've said. It all sounds very reasonable, but I'm just making the point that we've got a vote to take. Depending on the outcome of that vote, we might need to resume the conversation about codifying procedures. Yeah, because otherwise it might get a bit complicated. Well, it already is. I think it was Councillor Jagger, then Councillor De Sera. Sorry if I've got that the wrong way around. Yeah.
Get the whole picture from the Labour group, because obviously not everybody is on the committee, and I thought it would be useful to do that as a precursor to anything going to full council. So that's what I did, and I did get some comments and reactions from people who aren't here, which I'd like to just share. What we thought was the idea of tabling it 3 days, working days in advance, was a big stumbling block. I want to say at the outset, this proposal doesn't have the support of the Labour group, or that part of it. I say that with some reluctance because I recognise the concerns that have prompted it and the positive intentions behind it. However, having considered the proposal carefully, believe it would have unintended consequences for how democratic debate operates in this chamber. For us, the key principle is the ability of councillors to respond to arguments, evidence and points raised during a debate on a motion. While I understand the desire to provide greater certainty and more time for consideration, this proposal risks restricting the Chamber's ability to react to developments as they arise. In practice, it could reduce transparency and weaken the connection between public participation and decision-making. Residents who attend meetings and contribute from the public gallery should be able to influence debate. Restricting amendments risks turning debate into more of a formality than a genuine exchange of views. The purpose of council meetings is to allow councillors to consider the latest information, hear public representations and, where necessary, adjust their positions in light of what they have heard before a decision is taken. In our view, that is an important part of representative democracy and consistent with the spirit of our constitution. I fully recognise that some councillors, particularly neurodiverse members, may require additional time to consider substantive amendments before being expected to vote on them. That is a legitimate concern which deserves a practical solution. However, I do not believe the answer is to remove or severely restrict the ability to amend motions during debate. There is already ample scope within meetings to adjourn or pause proceedings where members have time to understand the implications of a significant amendment. Rather than limiting democratic debate, a more balanced approach would be to formalise this process by allowing the Chair to grant adjournments, perhaps of up to 30 minutes, where substantive amendments are proposed. This would support members who need additional time while preserving the flexibility and responsiveness that effective debates require. I recognise that the intention behind this proposal is to promote inclusion. Inclusion is important, but good democratic processes should seek to balance the needs of all participants. Residents and taxpayers should continue to have a meaningful opportunity to influence decisions through their engagement with the democratic process, and councillors should retain the ability to respond to those views during debate. There are also practical concerns. Amendments are often used to make motions more acceptable to a wider range of councillors and political groups, helping to build consensus and secure better outcomes. Under this proposal, I believe we are likely to see more motions fail because opportunities for compromise will be reduced. A recent example was the motion brought forward by Katie Collier on play provision, where substantial amendments helped shape the final motion. Under my recent reading of those proposed changes, motion authors would have had far less ability to work constructively with colleagues to refine their proposals during the debate. That would make consensus building more difficult and could ultimately lead to more motions being defeated. For those reasons, I believe that there may be a better way to address this genuine concern. We should support councillors who need additional time to consider amendments, but we should do so through procedural safeguards such as adjournments rather than limiting the democratic ability of the Chamber to debate, approve and improve motions. This was the view of the whole Labour group as a summary, and I hope the proposers of this motion will consider these concerns and work with us to find an approach that supports inclusion while preserving the flexibility and responsiveness that effective democratic debate requires. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sarah, and thank you for the effort to canvass all those views and share them. Councillor Jagger?
I would like to say that there is also a discussion about this motion within the Liberal Democrat group, and we were quite keen for this debate to happen in this committee first, for these views to be shared publicly so that members of the public can also be part of it. One of our key concerns is that this limiting motions and amendments would limit freedom of expression, and it could be used to silence dissenting views that we find annoying or irritating, and this may happen in the name of efficiency. And I always think that we have to imagine how we would feel if we were in the minority and our voice was the one that was annoying or irritating, and how we would like it if that was the case. I just would like to say that democracy is not meant to be efficient, and this is something I always said to my students. Efficiency and democracy are not the same thing, and they shouldn't be. Dictatorships are very efficient, and I don't think that's something we want to be aspiring for. I'm not saying that this is what this motion is doing, but efficiency is overrated sometimes. And sometimes heated or unplanned debate is necessary, and I think this might limit that. And just to give you my experience as a councillor, we had an amendment on the pump track that was deliberately submitted at the last minute. The element of surprise was very important in order to create political pressure, and to create an opportunity for persuasive debate on the day before party whips could steal that political momentum. And sometimes that is absolutely necessary. I want to acknowledge, though, that inclusivity is very important, and we acknowledge that there might be difficulties for some people and that we have to address those somehow. I like the idea of the adjournments. I like the idea of formalizing the process. In my experience as a councillor, I wasn't very sure how to submit an amendment, how to respond to that. If we had a process making it very clear, that would make the system a lot easier much easier to use. Also, maybe a more strict application of the non-negating motion. I can think of one of my motions in particular where in retrospect, I should have said that the amendment proposed negated my motion, but I didn't know how and when I would be able to say that in the chamber. So formalizing the procedure might actually allow us to have a more orderly debate. So any process that we can do in terms of training councillors on how to table amendments, some sort of formal procedure, as long as we're not limiting or putting too many stumbling blocks to limit the debate, would be welcomed.
Thank you, Councillor Chagg. I've got my own thoughts. I'm very mindful it's just struck 10. So I do want to move to a vote on this suggestion. But I've got Councillor Barnes after Councillor Mace, and then if it's okay, I'll share my own thoughts and then move to a vote on this. So Councillor Mace, then Councillor Barnes, then myself.
I'm happy for Councillor Barnes to go first because then I can respond to everybody's points.
Thank you. I think good manners comes into it to a large degree. Now, very often people want to get to a good place and they don't want to gameplay. And occasionally there is game playing going on in this process. I agree with the idea that training should be given so that people understand Citrine a bit better and actually understand how things are done. But very often when you go into a meeting and full council, you get the public participation and something might just click in that part of the meeting and you think, oh, need to amend. Now, there's something that is so important that actually nobody spotted it, but it needs to be brought in. So I really like the idea that you can amend, even if it's very late in the day. Now, when I go into licensing subcommittees, quite often we get information at the last minute because they're allowed to do that. And we then adjourn to read all the papers. So it happens elsewhere in this council that we do take that time out. And I think that the idea that that happens in full council when there is an issue that needs to be considered is the right way to go, rather than stifling debate. Now, we see at County Hall what happens there, where debate is significantly stifled, and that is the wrong way to go as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Mace.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so thank you everybody for your contributions and thoughts. Because I do really value the debate and discussion around this. So I think to respond to some of the points, so responding to arguments and evidence and decision making during the debate. I mean, I agree that responding in debates is a crucial part of democracy, and I don't think that this suggestion limits that in any manner. Indeed, I think the ability to see a big amendment before the meeting promotes debate because it gives time to groups to discuss the potential amendments before the meeting and better organised arguments and thoughts for discussion in the chamber. And it may be that from there, the temperature in the room or discussion in the room is on an amendment that could be made to it that would get it to pass all the committee or the groups. And I think that's up to the mayor or the chair then to rule on. Again, like I said, the suggestion here is not to say to the amendment to the constitution we don't allow any amendments ever, or you must publish all amendments. It's saying the examples that we've all seen in meetings where somebody comes in with a printout of 35 copies of an amendment that ideally would have been shared at the very latest at 6 o'clock before the meeting, so that groups have got an opportunity to look at it and discuss it and come back to the meeting with what their thoughts are. And then we can have the debate and fully form where we get to. And I think, transparency has been mentioned. I think publishing those things before the meeting, maybe it's not 3 days beforehand, but having those things published, again, aids transparency, because people can look at those things and understand it. Whereas, somebody's watching the video online, they don't see an amendment. They only see it when it appears in the minutes, or they have to, listen and understand what's going on there. And I've sat in enough council meetings where, there's been discussion back and forth of what this amendment actually means. That if we have an amendment before the meeting, I think it aids that transparency to share it. And I think, building on that, public participation is important. Responding to what people say in the meetings is absolutely important for members of the public. But if members of the public can also see the amendments before they speak, because often the public participation slots are before we get to motion debates, the public speakers can then respond to what's being said as well. And they may introduce points of debates around amendments that we had not thought of, and then we can talk about those in the debate and make amendments from that. Because, again, just to reiterate the point, the proposal that we're talking about is not to stop amendments or prevent amendments. It's to say large amendments, set those expectations that in general those should be shared. Because, Councillor Lamb, you mentioned about group leaders discussing amendments. I mean, I've only been a group leader for a year. That has never happened. Nobody's ever rung me with an amendment, even when I've been proposing for it before the meeting. It's only appeared in the meeting, and that's the first I've heard of it. The previous conversation I'd had was, like, will you support this? No. And that was it. I didn't receive any amendments. And I think, that's when we had the corporate peer challenge. That was something I raised as, like, this is something we could improve in groups working together, is if we have those conversations beforehand. And I think, if people start having those conversations, I will be very happy. But if they don't, this is why I'm looking at this constitution change, to say, okay, can we please see these amendments beforehand so that we can actually understand what's going to happen. On adjournments, I mean, I'm open to the idea that we have the ability to call the adjournments, and if we can't get anything else through, then that's something I would accept. However, my concerns with the adjournments is the amount of time, not just for councillors, but for officers and Guildhall staff. Keeping this building opening later costs money, presumably in staff time and electricity and all of those kind of things. Whereas publishing an amendment on the website, like an hour before the meeting or a day before the meeting, doesn't cost anything. If we think about the time it takes, 35 councillors, 30-minute agenda, that's 17.5 hours of person time. If we had officers on that, that's over 20 hours of person time for a 30-minute adjournment. I take the point that democracy is not supposed to be efficient, but it's like, if we have the option to say, let's publish these beforehand, let's set the expectation that we should be publishing them beforehand, that's an opportunity to not be efficient, but to save time. The play motion is a good example of cross-party working. I don't think that was amended in the meeting. It was amended as part of discussions before the meeting, which is kind of what I'm aiming for. That's what I'd like to see, is that amendments are published so that we can discuss them as groups and say, okay, this is what we think we'll get through between us, not to have amendments that come in that make it acceptable to more groups, but aren't shared before that meeting. So, the final thing I want to say on this comes back to the Equality Act 2010, which requires workplaces to make reasonable adjustments to accommodate conditions like dyslexia, autism, and ADHD that bring processes challenges. And the EHRC has this to say on a reasonable adjustment. So, when deciding whether an adjustment is reasonable, you can consider how effective the change will be in avoiding the disadvantage the disabled worker would otherwise experience. So, having discussed this with the disabled workers in this case, or the members, I'm convinced that this would be effective. Its practicality, so other councils have similar measures in their constitutions, as Sean mentioned, and if an amendment can be written and printed before a meeting, it can be shared before a meeting. The cost, so unlike an adjournment, this is a zero cost suggestion. The organisation's resources and size, I'm pretty sure the council has the resources and size to print an amendment before a meeting or share an amendment on its website, and the availability of financial support. I don't think we need financial support to accomplish this. So overall, I think this is an effective, practical and cheap and achievable change to make us a more effective organisation and compliant with the Equality Act 2010. So that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mace. I was going to come in and add my comments and then move to a vote, but I saw a couple of hands there. I'm going to take those hands, but if I could urge brevity, and I will take my own advice as well. Councillor Jagger, then Councillor Teixeira.
Perhaps there could be room for a compromise where we set in expectation or a guidance that amendments are submitted ahead of time whenever possible using a particular procedure, with the acknowledgement that sometimes it might be necessary for practical or political reasons to do a late amendment that will require an adjournment. So just because somebody might decide to do an amendment on the day, that means that it's not allowed. And that would then become a political choice that could be challenged and criticized on the day and justified on the day. So we might, as a measure of goodwill, submit them in advance through a particular procedure on the understanding that is not a requirement.
Just to respond to that, I was just thinking about that as you were talking. So, for example, the committee services team could email group leaders 24 hours before the meeting and say, are there any amendments you wish us to alert the other groups to? So that could be just a trigger. And then groups would say, no, thank you, I don't have any amendments I wish to alert the other groups to, or yes, I do. So that could be the queue. So the day before, Dem Services could say, are there any amendments that you wish us to share on your behalf? It then helps us to run stuff through the printer as well. If amendments were shared, they could be published. So I'd take the point about you can't read out track changes really in a meeting. So it could just be then, but it would be, as you say, is there anything that anyone wishes to share? And it would be phrased like that.
Okay, thank you both. Councillor Teixeira.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to check my understanding of what Councillor Mace has said, because everything I'd read up until our conversation this evening was that this was a mandated thing and it was 3 days or nothing. But what has just been said is not that. It does make a difference. I think the amount of time required beforehand is crucial to whether or not it's an acceptable thing to consider. Maybe a day, maybe trigger, get some discussion. I have no problem with any of that, as long as it's not mandated. Because I think the idea that you have that flexibility and then to go to the forced, if you like, adjournment where necessary, I think that's the compromise that I would feel comfortable with, and I think from what I've heard from other members of the group as well.
Grant. Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, sorry. I hear what you're saying, Sean, but I wouldn't want that codified in a constitution. It might be added into the leaders' protocol as a guideline that leaders, as part of their, working together, amendments. There would be an expectation that amendments would be communicated in the way you've set out, rather than you have to do it. I think as a guideline, it can be added into the protocol.
Okay, I've got my thoughts on the original suggestion. What's happened over the last 20 minutes is there's been a bespoke working group on alternatives. So there's a crossover between a debate about the original suggestion and a very valid working group. Can I park that working group, which might or might not come into being, depending on the vote? So I'm only going to comment on the original suggestion proposed by Councillor Mace. I'm going to read from my script. So I appreciate Councillor Jagger's, everyone's comments. I appreciate Councillor Jagger's candor regarding the element of surprise when a substantial amendment is shared at the last minute. I appreciate the candor. However, I'd argue that providing a big amendment in advance of full council is a basic courtesy. We already insist that motions are submitted several days in advance of full council. The proposed change to the procedure for motions is a reasonable adjustment to support councillors with processing challenges when considering large amendments to motions. Now, I'm a late diagnosed autistic ADHDer. So, I got elected here when I was 30, and I didn't realise until I was 42 that I've got ADHD. So for 12 years, I was looking at substantial amendments going, what the hell's going on? So you can see where my thoughts lie in terms of support. Indeed, on that note, this is consistent with the EDI ethos that we discussed earlier in this meeting. So the reasonable adjustment is for amendments that were clearly written and printed before full council meetings. I can't read my writing there. Before full council meetings are circulated sometime before the meeting starts, so that councillors, including people like myself, with processing challenges, are able to fully digest them before the meeting starts. So rather than sitting on them, share them in advance to allow people to digest. Finally, later amendments would still be allowed, even if they're raised at full council on the night. So we're not saying this suggestion, which is not mine, by the way, I'm supporting it, but it's not mine. We're not saying you can't raise amendments. Amendments could be raised at full council on the night. However, these should be limited to clarifying changes rather than insertion, modification, or deletion of multiple clauses, which are substantial amendments. So I've been coming to this building for 14 years, and I've routinely seen motions that people have put a lot of time into, fundamentally amended on the night, paragraphs crossed through, and so on and so on. It's incredibly difficult to have a truly democratic debate if, speaking for myself, I can't understand what the motion says anymore. So I support the suggestion. I kind of know where the vote's going to go anyway, but I've said my piece, and thank you for bearing with me. I hope that what I've said, having said what I've just said, that it's convincing to you, and I hope that you're considering how you might vote on this, because I think this is a really important suggestion, and I would urge you to support it. But I think we should move to that vote and then possibly resume that working group that we fell into. But Sian, you're going to come in there.
Chair, I'm just going to offer just a bit of structure. So I think that there's the first proposal to vote on, which is to require the change to the Constitution so that it would be mandatory for substantive amendments to be made before a meeting. And then you vote on that, and then if you don't support that as a committee, then you can then agree another version of change that you can vote on then, we can agree some words for that.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate it's late, but I think it's really important that we nail this. Julian, did you get that rewording that Sian's just suggested? Because it's not quite...
I think Sian's suggesting the first issue that she'd read out is what you vote on, which is basically the issue about mandatory or not for substantial amendments. So I think if we can take a vote on that, if everybody's clear as to what the vote is, then there is an option then for somebody to make an alternative proposal if that doesn't succeed.
Okay. Sorry to put you on the spot there, but I just want to make sure we get the minutes correctly. Sian, I'm going to get you to repeat it anyway. Alex?
So it's only a question really about, I'm happy that's what we're voting on, but I guess what do we mean by substantial amendment? Because we've had different definitions come around about modifying and deleting multiple clauses or whatever, or would that be determined by the chair and vice chair about what exactly that means?
Councillor Mace, this is what went through my mind in terms of drafting a covering report. So I could only conclude that it has to be delegated to myself in consultation with Chair and Vice Chair to get some wording agreed. We can socialise that with the committee, happy to do that, but then that all gets referred to full council where the debate happens again in any event. I think we've got to take the view that a word like substantive versus a word like minor is something that would be delegated to us and we'd put something together.
Okay, so Sian, would you mind repeating what you think we should be voting on tonight?
So first of all, the committee is considering whether it wants to support changes which would mandate substantive amendments to have to happen before a meeting.
And all those against that recommendation? So only the first vote counts, that's carried. Sorry, no, that's not carried. Checking still awake. So that's not carried. So we've had lots of suggestions shared tonight. Is it appropriate, do people have the energy to, gather those suggestions as an alternative to the original suggestion? So do we park it for now, or do we carry on the debate and codify alternatives to the original suggestion?
Chair, I think 2 came from the floor, and we can put them into one set of proposals, and you can see if you would all support that. The 2 that came from the collective discussion was, firstly, that there would be, in addition to the group leaders protocol, to encourage the sharing of substantive amendments before meetings by agreement where possible, some wording like that. And secondly, that a number of members in the chamber may call for an adjournment in the event that a substantive amendment is given. And then the number of members is TBC, I think, for tonight.
Councillor Cookson?
Just a question to Sean. If this was in full council and we were amending what the motion was, would that count as a substantive amendment or not? Because I think this is the crux of some of it. And just from Neil's point of view, I really do sympathise with the idea of whatever we do, we need time for people who don't. I mean, it's interesting, I hadn't realised how slow I read against Matt until we're reading the same document, and I have to keep saying, stop scrolling, because I'm up here and he's somewhere down here, and that clearly is the difference of everybody takes a different time to process things.
Yeah, I mean, my wife reads a book a day. She's a full-time teacher. I read 3 books a year. So it says all you need to know. I feel what you're saying there. So, Sean, yeah. Yeah. So, what questions about your question, Councillor Cookson, about the 2?
I guess what the point I was making was this would count as a substantive amendment. So if we could only make substantive amendments in writing in full council, if this had gone to full council, it would have just, the motion would have fallen. We wouldn't have been able to then take it forward because it would have been a substantive amendment that we hadn't put in writing in advance. If that made sense.
Case study.
It was a case, I was trying to explain a case study of exactly how council works. That if we'd have just ended up, the motion would have fallen, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to do that. And I think this is just a really good example of the case that we're making.
Yeah.
But also, because this is quite complicated in what I'm saying, I'm actually going, are we all following all of this? So maybe that's the complication.
Yeah, it's a very meta conversation, this, amendments to amendments, yeah. And you've captured that perfectly, so yeah. So at this point, Sean, is it a vote on protocol change so that amendments are shared with leaders in advance, and secondly, that a certain number of members, 5, can call for an adjournment in full council?
I'd left both points slightly more open, Chair.
Okay.
I'd said in relation to the first point, amendment to the group leaders protocol to encourage the sharing of substantive amendments where possible before a meeting. Yeah. And the second point, I'd said a defined number of members in the chamber may call for an adjournment in the event that a substantive motion is tabled. Okay. I think it's for us to decide what that number is. Unless you want to spend another half an hour, and I suggest we just come away from that point on the number and come back to that.
I don't want to just expedite this just because it's 23 minutes past 10, but I am mindful that it's 23 minutes past 10. Are there any comments on those 2 alternatives to the original suggestion about amendments with leaders, sharing with amendments with leaders, and calling for an adjournment? Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, I'd like to formally propose that.
Given that you made the original suggestion, do you want to come back on the alternatives that have just been outlined?
No, really. I think I've kind of addressed the points that have already been raised. So okay. Happy to proceed.
So Councillor Lamb's formally moving the 2 suggestions. It looks like we've come to a compromise there. Councillor Barnes, was that a contribution or just voting? Yeah.
Very often people in exam situations have extra time due to processing issues. So this would be, on one level, just the same, a reasonable adjustment for members who might need that slight extra time. So I think it's completely in line with EDI. Thank you.
Grant, thank you very much. So, Sean, I'm not going to ask you to repeat what you've just said. We've all heard it. All those in favour of the two suggested alternatives? I'll leave it at that. Unanimous. Yes. Thank you very much, everyone. Democracy in action. Nice. Yes, it's very late. Are we going to press on? No break required? Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. That's great. So, Sean, I believe it's over to you again, and we're almost there.
Chair, in view of the fact that we had the annual governance statement earlier on the agenda, and this is the annual report, which is also a look back at the work plan of the committee, we recognise that that is an assurance piece. I'm just going to suggest that members will have read the annual report and that they can take it as read unless there are any particular questions.
Okay. Thank you, Sean. Thank you for the report. Any questions or comments on the annual report 25-26 for Audit and Governance Committee? No, just to say thank you to the committee for all that work that has been reported on and the report for writing the report. So the two recommendations are to approve the report and that we submit it to council for information. So we'll take those as a pair. All those in favour of the recommendations? Thank you very much. We've got one more item, then AOB, then an exempt item. So community governance review, we're going to hopefully note the progress made by the working group on the community governance review. I'm going to add a very brief comment within the discussion, and I'm going to hand back over to Sean.
Thank you, Chair. The reason that this report is on the agenda is that as far as the public record shows, the process for undertaking the community governance review was last discussed here and at full council, whereas what we know as a group sitting around this table is that there's been a high level of activity in preparation for the first staging post, which is the full council meeting in July. So I can just use the word assurance. The reason for putting this report within the papers is to say there is a work programme underway. There's a high level of participation from the working group. The report itemises again, just reminds what those governance staging posts are, and where visits have been done, and what value the working group has added to all the material that's been produced and the work that's coming forward. And I'm sure others around the table may wish to comment on that, but it wasn't obviously, as you can imagine, the idea that we would debate the merits of the ultimate proposal. It was to provide something in the process to show that we are well underway against the published timetable that full council had adopted. It is a challenging timetable, but again, there's been a high level of commitment from members and indeed officers to meet that timetable. And we know that we've got work even between tonight and the 14th of July, as we know. And then beyond the 14th of July, we know that, again, that will break itself down into further dates as we try and aim for something in November. So that's all really. It's a process report, Chair. Obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sean. Yeah, I'm not anticipating a huge debate, but I appreciate that people will want to have their say on what is a very important process. Councillor Sayers first, then Councillor Lamb.
I'd just like to say how much I've appreciated going on these visits. I've been on all but 2 of them, I think. And they're very interesting, very helpful. It's great to have the officers so engaged with us on this process. And yeah, it's really worthwhile.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, just want to echo that. I mean, I've been on all six visits stroke meetings, and it's been really, really interesting. And obviously, we've got a really important meeting tomorrow night because I think the consultation closes today, so I think Claire's going to be rushing around to put together some initial sort of findings, so that's going to be really interesting. And the other thing that's come out from Julian for the meeting tomorrow is some really starting to boil down now, if we are going to go with a town council, what that's going to look like. And I think this time tomorrow, I think there will be some really solid suggestions about how many councillors, what kind of power it's going to be, what the boundaries are going to be. So I think it's going to be really firmed up by this time tomorrow, actually. So it is very tight, but I think we're making enormous progress. And the time we spend on these journeys, long day in Northampton, long day in Shrewsbury, was really, really worth it. And there's a great table which is in the documents for tomorrow night, which has a very easy comparison between each of the 6 places that we've seen. So I think that'll be able to ensure we've got some very well informed decision making for tomorrow night.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. Councillor Mace?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for their dedication going on all the visits. Unfortunately, I don't have enough holiday left to go on any visits, so I appreciate everyone's dedication to going on all of them. So I look forward to the meeting tomorrow and we'll see what all the findings are.
Thank you, Councillor Mace. I just want to say special thanks to Julian and Claire for all the effort into organising the consultation, and Matthew as well, and the visits, because that can't have been easy, the logistics of trying to get the right date and for so many people. Echo what's already been said. The visit's been really, really fascinating. I always remember Claire's eyes lighting up when she looked at that Shrewsbury presentation. It was like she was in hog heaven just looking at this presentation. I thought I was a political anorak, but no, I've been defeated. It was really fantastic. I can't claim to have the same level of commitment as Councillor Lamb. I've not been able to go to every single visit or every Teams meeting, but I've been to a few and they've been really informative and really inspirational. So we're going to look at a comparison of all that data tomorrow evening. 14th July, full council is going to decide what the second phase of the local governance review consultation is going to look like. And it seems that we're on track. It is an ambitious timescale, but it seems we're on track for the time being. So yeah, thank you to everyone who's been involved. It's been a huge amount of work so far. The recommendation is that we note the progress, or is that we are assured by the progress made by the, we're assured.
Assured by your own activity.
Assured by your own progress. If you're not assured by your own progress, you're not awake. So I'll take that as read, that we are assured by what we've done so far, and still some work to go on that one. So yeah, looking around, yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Possibly ought to put this one up higher up the agenda item order, because it's such an important item, but anyway, too late for me to say that, and I've said it anyway. There's an AOB, obviously, and there's an exempt item, and I've not been notified of any AOB.
We don't need to go in exempt session if you're happy to just approve the minutes.
I am indeed, and I have read them, but it's so late and I'm so adult, I've forgotten what they're about. Bear with me. Okay, so I've just been advised we don't need to go into private session to agree the minutes of the exempt items. So unless there are any questions, comments about those minutes, are we prepared to accept them as an accurate record? Great. Thank you very much. I think we're done. Long meeting, we always knew that was going to happen, but thank you everyone for your patience, your contributions. Been a very interesting meeting, hopefully very useful meeting. Have a safe journey. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you, Sean.
I've been at a 4-hour one before.
6 hours.
6 hours for audit committee.